And welcome to the program. You're watching Our Town here in studio at Mohawk TV. And today we have a special guest with us. Joining us is Kenneth Deer. And we're going to be discussing some of the things that he's been up to these past couple of months, and also a letter from the Mohawk Council that was in response to the Confederacy. So Kenneth, welcome to studio.
Oh, nice to be back.
How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Okay, so let's discuss the your recent trip to New York City, which for some of you who may be following this story was the two-row what was it called?
Campaign.
The awareness campaign. Thank you. They had traveled from
Onondaga. They started from Onondaga. They started, I think, in June, and then they paddled all the way down, the various lakes into the Mohawk River, all the way to Albany, and from Albany or Troy, actually, down to New York City, down to Hudson. It was a very, it was a wonderful event. I went to Troy 2 weeks before, and where they had a festival, a one-day festival, a lot of speeches where they explained the two-row, what it is, and the whole object of this is to commemorate 400 years is when we had relations with the Dutch. The Dutch were the first people we had, Europeans we had contact with, and we made an agreement at that time in 1613. So we want to commemorate that, and of course any agreement that we make with them is based on the concepts of the two-row. One row representing the ship with sails, which was the Dutch, and one row representing the canoe, which was our people. So this flotilla went down from in this case from Troy, New York, down to New York, and they had one ship with sails and a whole bunch of canoes and kayaks and
How many
a
people
wampum.
were involved?
They had 600 people who registered to paddle. So at different times, 600 people were, not everybody paddled the whole way, but they would take part in 1 or 2 days, and they would camp out, and there was events all the way along. It wasn't a very difficult paddle. They had, because of the distances weren't long. The weather, of course, rain and wind was a problem on the river. But at every stop there was an event, and there was a demonstration, an explanation of the two-row, and they were very welcomed all the way down. All the way down to the river.
That's so amazing.
It was amazing, right? Danny Stacy and his son and daughter took part from here, from Kahnawake.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So you might want to talk to them.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have a lot of stories to tell. Anyway, so when the object, of course, was to commemorate this 400-year agreement, and they landed in New York on Friday morning of August 9th, which was the International Day of Indigenous People at the UN, and there were hundreds of people on the dock. And at the same time, just by coincidence, there was a group of horse riders from the Dakotas, from Manitoba, called the Dakota Riders, and
I've seen that
and they traveled. They were traveling down, and they joined them in Albany. And while the flotilla was going down the river, they were going down land, And so the Dakota Riders got to New York first that morning. And so they're very colorful, and they were there to go to the UN to bring their issues forward.
Right.
And so the flotilla came in, and they were greeted by these hundreds of people. It was tough. It was a tough paddle that day because they were fighting the wind, but the tide. They're fighting going against the tide. So they were supposed to arrive at 10:30 in the morning, but they only arrived around noon.
And they came in on the Hudson, like in Seaport.
On the Hudson.
Like, did they go down to Seaport?
It was on Pier 97, which is on 56th Street West.
Yes. Okay.
All right, so
That's amazing.
Yeah, so they landed there, and there were people to greet them, and they had a two-row, and the Consul General for the government of the Netherlands was there, and so they had these speeches that came out. They gave him gifts, and they presented him with a two-row, and on behalf of the government of the Netherlands, he thanked the Mohawks and the Haudenosaunee because and he acknowledged that the Dutch would not have survived in the New World if it wasn't for the help of the Mohawk people, and he acknowledged the two-row, and it was really great. He also made a very strong pitch towards the environment, and that we have to learn how to live together. We have to learn from the indigenous people because the environment, the biggest threat to humanity survival now is the environment.
Right.
And so he made a very, very wonderful speech, and it was terrific.
What did it feel like to be there and be part of that?
Everybody felt good. It was a really uplifting experience, and people had a greater understanding. We had Native people, non-Native people, Native people from all over the place too. It wasn't just Haudenosaunee people. There were others there, and people from New York. You had a member of Congress, U.S. Congress was there, and somebody representing, I think, the city of New York or the borough that we were in. So the politicians also were very well aware of this, and because Aturo teaches so many things in it. It's Aturo. The concept of two people living side by side, not interfering with each other, can be applied anywhere in the world.
Right.
So it's a very important symbol for everybody, not just
400 years.
And it's been 400 years, and it shows you the wisdom of our people at that 400 years ago understood the concept of self-determination, of coexistence, and that we could live side by side but separately, and that should still be applied today. And that's been the principle of our relationships with the United States, Canada, Great Britain, the Dutch, and everybody else that we have contact with. And if Quebec ever separates, that would be the same kind of relationship that we would have with a separate Quebec. It has applications everywhere. You could use it in Palestine right now, Israel and Palestine. You could use it in any of these places where you're having problems. In the world. So
how do you think it's effective? Do you think it's effective today still?
Yes, I really think you do, because we always when we our rights are always being challenged, by the settler states. So we always have to be fighting against that, and the Aturo gives us that strength, that wisdom that our ancestors had in reminding the settler states that this is who we are, and this is the kind of relationship that we had when we first met, and this is the kind of relationship that we want to continue to have today, and we still believe in the Aturo, as a viable instrument, and so that's why it's important to continue to revive that, keep reminding everybody that this is a relationship that we live by. It's not a theoretical thing. It's something that we believe in. So that's why it's important.
How many people were coming into the dock that day?
I don't know how many. They think they're talking about 80 or 90 because of the weather, and they were exhausted when they came in. They were a bit.
Did they come from Ganatsorege or they came from Poughkeepsie?
They came. I can't remember. The Poughkeepsie was about 2 or 3 days before.
Okay,
I can't remember exactly where they came. It was at the tip of the northern tip of Manhattan Island,
Okay.
Where they came from.
Wow, that's amazing.
Day. Yeah.
And it's so funny to be coming into New York, right?
Yeah. And then when it was over, that part, it wasn't over. I mean, they had to march from there, from 56th Avenue to Dag Hammarskjöld Park at the UN, which was on 47th Street, east. So they had to march there, and the horses, police escort, and everything, and the people walked in New York City. Yeah. So the police and everything, and the crowd got bigger, I think, as we went along, and we missed that part because I can't walk that far because of my injuries. But we took a cab and we had lunch, and as soon as we walked out of the restaurant, they walking right by. So the timing was terrific. And then so there was another rally in the park, in Dag Hammarskjöld Park, right across from the UN. And at that case, the horse riders were the big star at that point, which was fine. We all share. So remember, the Dakotas were part of Sitting Bull's people. And when they, after that Little Bighorn, they moved up into Canada. So Canada does not want to recognize them as being, quote unquote, Indigenous people inside Canada. So they have problems out there. So that's what they're trying to explain to the UN.
It must have been something to see.
It was a terrific pictures. If you want some, I can send you some pictures.
Definitely, but we're also gonna take a quick commercial break. We're gonna come right back and we're gonna discuss. You were also at the UN and spoke there inside, and addressed a delegation of government, if you will. So we'll be right back to hear more on that story. Don't go away. You're watching Our Town here on Mohawk Television. Kahnawake. This program has been brought to you by Get and Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming. And welcome back to Our Town. If you're just joining us, we still have Kenneth Deer in studio with us today, and we're discussing various political issues, a recent trip to New York City, dealings with the UN, and we're going to be moving on after that to discuss a letter that was received by the Mohawk Council on behalf of the Confederacy.
Right.
So let's backtrack a little bit. So you're in New York City, and now you're
At the UN.
at the UN.
Yeah, all right. Now, every year on the International Day of Indigenous People, the UN has an event. It's usually a panel discussion of one kind. Last year it was Indigenous media. This year it was a panel on treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements between states and Indigenous people. And that was done on purpose because of the whole two-row
Right.
coming in. It was all arranged that way. It takes you months and months
We'd
to put
never
this
have
together.
thought that.
Yeah, it was not a coincidence. Everything has. And to get into the UN, you had to have a pass, and you had to register by August 2nd. You had to send your name in, your list, and then there's a guy outside, the name was Brody, I remember, and he was handing out these passes to everybody. So people would get, if there's any passes left over, then he handed them out to whoever else, because there were hundreds of people there.
Wow.
So we all got in into the meeting room, and there's a panel discussion. We were introduced by the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon was there, which is it's always honorable to have the Secretary General of the UN himself to come to such an event. And he was there a little late because he was tied up in another meeting. But we had videos that were shown in between the speakers. We had I think the special representative from the government of Panama, who was explaining her situation in Panama. We had the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, and who made a very good speech about treaties and how treaties should be honored, and that they should be there should be a mechanism to make sure that they're honored. That and future treaties should be made with the free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous people. So it's a very important speech made by a high-level member of the United Nations, and I refer to that later on. But then Oren Lyons spoke, and Oren Lyons is the star, all right? And he spoke for 19 minutes. He wasn't supposed to speak for 10, but he spoke for 19 minutes.
Could you just explain who he is for those viewers who may not know
Oren Lyons is an
Lyons?
Onondaga faith keeper, and he was a teacher at the University of Syracuse, I think, for a while, or Buffalo. And so he's a very world-renowned elder.
Yeah.
And he made just a terrific speech about the two-row and also about the whole relationship with the UN and the environment and things like that. It's a very Oren is always a spellbinding speaker, and he got a standing ovation at the end.
Wow, I could imagine. Yeah.
At the end of his talk. And then we had some. Then later on, there was the speakers from the floor. And then at that time, the Tiano from the indigenous people from Puerto Rico spoke, and then the government of Bolivia spoke. Somebody from the New Zealand government, a chief from Treaty 6, I think, in Alberta. He spoke with a full headdress. So another Dakota rider spoke, and who was interrupted by the chairman, which was unfortunate. So there was always all of this stuff. It went on for about almost 3 hours. I was the last speaker from the floor, and I just wrapped it up by thanking the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights for his comments on treaties, and because they should be respected, and also that to reminding them that there's a World Conference on Indigenous Peoples next year, and that because treaties are made between two sovereigns, respecting each other's right to self-determination, that when we're going to have a World Conference about Indigenous people, that we also should be there as equals, as a nation, on a nation-to-nation relationship.
That is next year.
Next year on September 22nd and 23rd in New York.
In New York,
But it's a high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly. It's not a World Conference like the ones on environment and stuff like that. It's a very limited and restricted thing. It's only a day and a half, and it's very, very difficult for Indigenous people to get equal participation in the environment, because the General Assembly is a meeting of states, and it's hard. And in the rules, you have to be a state to speak. So they have to bend the rules to allow us to do certain things. In the General Assembly, they're only going to allow 3 Indigenous people to speak from the front, and there's going to be a big battle over who that's going to be. And then there's going to be 4 panel discussions, and then in those panels, then there'll be Indigenous people on the panel, and then we'll be able to speak from the floor. However, during the states have priority, though. If there's a prime minister or a foreign minister, so they always speak first before anybody else. So it's going to be it's a difficult venue to operate in, and it's not going to be equal, but we're fighting as much as possible for some equal participation, and that's why the intervention on my part is to remind them that treaties are between two equals, and that in the World Conference we have to be treated as equals as well. That was the purpose of my intervention, to put more pressure on them. And
how was that received?
The secretary, the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, accepted it very well, and he said he agreed. You have to see the video, but he said his phrase was nothing about Indigenous peoples without Indigenous peoples. So he was very strongly saying that the UN will not make a decision about us without our participation. And that's what he's saying. It's exactly what we want. Now all we got to do is convince states to do that, because there are some very hostile states in the United Nations towards us. In particular, these days, Russia has been one of the most hostile. Even,
why is that?
Well, Russia, as you know, is very anti civil society, anti-NGO, anti stuff. You look at the anti-gay right now is a big issue in Russia. But they've even though Indigenous people in Russia have protections in the Constitution, the same thing is happening in Russia. What happens in Canada, the United States is they want the land, they want the natural resources underneath that land. So it's always the same struggle that they want to move us off the land so they can take the natural resources out and keep us poor and not have any voice or say in what happens to our territory. It's the same situation. Just that Russia is doing it now instead of 100 years ago, and so Russia is very, very hostile to rights that would hinder their development of land and natural resources on Indigenous territory. So it's that's the situation with it. And of course we have that same, of course, a lot more subtle from the United States. It's the same thing. The United States says very recently at the Permanent Forum that they do not recognize that Indigenous peoples have the same right of self-determination as other peoples. It's very, very awful statement. It's a terrible statement for the United States to say. It's incredibly racist that the United States government still has a policy today in their foreign affairs that Indigenous peoples are less than other peoples, like the French or the English or anybody else. And it's just and they openly state that. So it's quite a battle that we have. And that's why we have to be there. We have to be there too. And that's why we've been there. We've been there for decades. We know what they're like. You would think they would change, but they're just more subtle. Until recently, we thought that they were changing, but we thought Obama might make some change, and he has made some domestic changes, but still internationally we are still fighting against the archaic racist positions that states have about that Indigenous people are less than others.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would imagine that trying to give everyone the same level of playing field, if you will, would sort of be like an admittance to things, you know what I mean? And there's so much bad history there that it's like, how do you repair any of that without taking that responsibility?
You look at in the Canadian situation, that's why the Harper government so much is hiding documents. They're not turning over all the documents to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They just don't want to deal with issues. They look at the Grand River, Ohsweken they have a huge, the Canadian government has a huge debt to the Haudenosaunee because they all that land they sold out from under them, they kept it entrusted and they used it to fund World War I and to fund McGill University, but the interest and all that, it must come out to billions right now. But they don't want to deal with those issues. They don't want to deal honestly and forthrightly with the issues that we have.
Okay. On that note, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be right back here on Mohawk TV Channel 4. You're watching Our Town.
I want to specifically speak about the statement made by Mr. Simonovic, the special. The Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, and about the 4 points that he raised earlier in his intervention. And I'll go over them very quickly. One was effective remedies for treaties and treaty violations, and two, to use the UN and regional mechanisms to resolve disputes over treaties, and three, to identify where treaties are working and are being successful, and four, if new treaties are going to be made, that they are in line with the rights of indigenous peoples, and particularly free, prior, and informed consent. I think these are very, very important recommendations coming from the United Nations and an official human rights, because the United Nations is a private club of governments, and we're on the outside looking in, and that paradigm has to change. Treaties are nation-to-nation agreements between sovereign powers, and we are sovereign power, and yet we are still on the outside looking in. There is an opportunity in the future, in the near future, for the United Nations. The United Nations is holding a high-level meeting of the General Assembly, which is being called the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples next year. And Indigenous peoples have a right to self-determination. We have a nation-to-nation relationship with member states of the United Nations, and therefore we should have full and equal participation in that World Conference, just as we have a full and equal participation in treaties. And that's what we have to, that's the future, and that's what we have to change. And we're hoping that you, as a member, a high-level member of the United Nations, along with the states that put you in that position, will make sure that Indigenous peoples have that treaty relationship continue in that World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This program has been brought to you by Get and Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming. And welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, we do have Kenneth Deer in studio with us today, the Secretary of the Mohawk Nation at Kahnawake. I always get confuddled with that. So we were discussing the UN and the recent trip to New York and the 400th renewal campaign of the wampum. But just to wrap up the UN, so what did it feel like, after all that? You take the floor and you're the last one to speak, and how did that all finish up?
Well, it's good. I got good applause at the end, and a lot of congratulations. I think it was important for me to wrap up the end of the. It's good to speak. There's two places you want to speak. You want to speak first, and you want to speak last when in these kind of situations. So if I couldn't speak first, which is fine, if you get the chance to speak last, and then you get to wrap up and you get to hit the points that need to be reinforced in that discussion, and that's what I felt I did, and I think I did my job, what I was supposed to do, and that comes with experience. Though it's not something. If it's your first time in the UN and you're just sitting there and you raise your hand and you get to talk and it's fine. You can say whatever you like, but when you speak last, you have to take advantage of that spot, because when you're the last speaker, everybody listens. And so you have to take the opportunity to wrap it up, to find or take one or 2 points that you want to reinforce and hammer that home, because people remember that in the room, and the people, the decision makers will remember that. And so right. you gotta choose your spots well. And I was lucky to speak first, because the chairman recognized me, and Paul Sena, he's a Batwa from Africa. He was the chair. And he knew me, and so he made sure that I got the floor, over other people, because there wasn't enough room for everybody to speak. So
right.
So it's that experience, and it's not what you know, it's who you know, that can get you into that spot at that right time, to speak like that. It wasn't an accident that I spoke last. It was just the fact that the people at the front at the bureau and the staff. Wanted me to speak last.
Right. So you're well known in this area too, and you've been doing a lot of work, and you're going to continue to do a lot of work. So it's
Yeah. Experience it's good to go to the UN, but just don't go there once. You have to keep going back and back and back and back. And that takes. I think and that's the difference between those that go to the UN once or twice and those that keep going back. Because it's that visibility that can gain influence in the UN.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining all of that, and of course, it must have been really something teaching. To be in New York too. Yeah, of course, educational. Okay, so we're going to move on. I wanted to talk a little bit about the letter that was sent from the Confederacy. That was in
I can't remember when.
I think it was May or June. Anyways, we did speak to Wajas out of the 207 to just kind of explain about how we got there. Now, there was a letter that was recently sent from the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake in response to that Confederacy letter. You also had a community member and member of the 207 Longhouse, Tommy Deer, Deowizade, to respond to their letter with a lot of criticism in terms of some of the language that they used and how he felt the letter was written and things like that. So let's just discuss this openly.
Right.
And
Well, first of all, to repeat the background, make sure we understand it.
Yeah.
That the reason the Confederacy wrote a letter
Yeah.
was because the Confederacy felt that elected councils were assuming too much, assuming some of the symbols and some of the accomplishments of the Confederacy, and assuming that for themselves, So they
Right.
felt that they had to make it, and particularly the Iroquois caucus, which seems to be mimicking the Haudenosaunee.
now the Iroquois caucus is from the elected band council
Yeah,
system.
on the Canadian side of the
on
line.
the Canadian side.
Yeah, right. And they've been meeting, and some of the statements they have come out with, treads on the territory of the Confederacy,
Right.
And so the Confederacy said they had to say something, so they just basically told them in a nice way, look, you can't stop, you can't be using the Great Law. You can't be using things like the two-row and stuff like that, because those are the things that the Confederacy created, and that the elected councils are you can continue to do whichever you want to do, your administrative stuff and stuff like that, but you cannot try to assume to represent what the Confederacy represents, and that's all they were trying to do. Of course, the caucus didn't respond, but the Mohawk Council responded. Nobody else did, and they responded to the Confederacy, and then they went to a whole list. We thought the letter was a little nasty from the response from the band council.
Just
and
the tone of the letter?
the tone was
Okay.
a little nasty, and they also I thought they twisted history around a little bit and left some things out. And basically, they're basically saying that Kahnawake was not really part of the Confederacy, but a city-state, And so we had we didn't respond. The letter wasn't addressed to us. The letter was addressed to the Confederacy. So our Longhouse didn't have to respond.
Right.
However, Tommy did write a commentary, which was out in the public, and he raised some very good counterpoint, and saying that they were. Kahnawake was, in and out and changed because of its strategic situation. It had certain kind of things that he had to do, had to deal with it, and at one time it sided with the French and had to fight other Mohawks on the field, and eventually, of course, the French lost, and we didn't, But when all that was said and done, the Confederacy, said, look, and there was a meeting here, and in 1760, said, look, don't do that again, and there was an exchange of wampums, and Kahnawake was back into the Confederacy, in 1760. So they, so you can't say that Kahnawake was outside the Confederacy, because it was inside. And different times, things happened. This what they call the Seven Nations group. Well, they were not nations, but they were seven communities. They called themselves Seven Nations, but they weren't nations. It wasn't the Mohawk Nation. It was Kahnawake.
Yeah.
And it was understood that they had to make certain agreements and alliances, I guess, to do certain things. But the Confederacy also, they understood that they were there. I don't think there was a conflict between the seven races and the Seven Nations, but they had but they understood that it was there, and those things had to resolve itself. Certain things happened that the American Revolution happened, the War of 1812 happened, all kinds of
Right.
things happened
That is an evolution
Yeah.
of things and
But
politics.
the point of the matter, though, is the bottom line, though, is that the Constitution, the Great Law of Peace, the Kahnawake is something that binds, the original five nations together, plus and then the Tuscarora, and that's what keeps us going. That's what the flag is all about. What they call the Hiawatha Belt Iwanta Belt, and that binds the big flag that the Band Council flies. That represents that Constitution and how we guide ourselves, how our chiefs are selected, how our clan mothers work, how our clan system works. It has our social responsibilities, has a spiritual cycle. It's a holistic thing. It's not a religion. It's not a religion, and this is the body that created the Turo, the relationship with the Dutch 400 years ago, and the ongoing relationship. Those are magnificent accomplishments. The whole philosophy in the Great Law about bearing your weapons of war, and that to use only good words that don't cut and hurt with each other to resolve our differences. Those are amazing kind of philosophies that we should be guiding our life by, and that's ours, and that's what we live by, for the Iroquois Caucus, for the elected councils now to try to form an organization like the Iroquois Caucus, and to try to mimic the Confederacy, is a problem for us, and we're saying is that be careful with that, We're not saying that you're not Mohawks. We're not saying that you're not whatever, But all we're saying is that you cannot take the symbols and those positions that the Haudenosaunee have created, and take it for yourself, Look, in response, of course, the Iroquois Caucus tries to say that no, we're not replacing the Haudenosaunee. We're not trying to do that, But their actions betray their words, because you look at their. I saw a draft letter from the caucus to Harper asking for a meeting, and in there they quote all the Turo, they quote the history and stuff like that, and the elected councils don't have that history, They were created in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They can't, Six Nations itself only had elected council in 1924. It began, So they can't, they say one thing, that they're not trying to replace the Haudenosaunee, yet they're taking they're trying to take that history and try to fool the Prime Minister of Canada to say that, look, we are the ones that created that were built the Confederacy. We're the ones that have the Turo Wampum, and we're the ones that did the Covenant Chain and stuff like that. Right. And that's not true.
And that's a very dangerous ground to be portraying.
And it's wrong.
That way.
So that's what the issue is. It's politics.
Yeah. And we're going to take a quick commercial break. Don't go away. We're going to head into a little bit more of this letter and then wrap up the show. So stay tuned. You're watching Our Town here on Mohawk Television, local channel 4. This program has been brought to you by Get and Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming. And welcome back to the program. You're watching Our Town. Today in studio is Kenneth Deer, and we were recently discussing the letter or the origin of the letter and the history and the responses at this point. So what were some of the things that you felt that were really important about Deweesaday's response? Well,
I think I referred to that there was an agreement in 1760 that Kahnawake would be back into the Confederacy, and that just before the War of 1812, there was a meeting in Buffalo Creek, and Kahnawake went there, and they said that they wanted to know. They knew the war was coming, and they said, well, what position do we take? And the Confederacy said they would stay neutral. So they came back and they would, of course, but they got drawn into Kahnawake because of the situation we're in. We had to fight at Chateauguay. We had to protect ourselves. So certain times, we had to do the things. But the point of the matter is that the Kahnawake went to get direction of what to do, and they tried to stay neutral, couldn't because of the particular situation they were in. But even still, after the even in going into the letters that when the Indian Act came in the 1880s, the Kahnawake in the letters that called themselves Haudenosaunee, Haudenosaunee and the Mohawk, and they were saying that they were part of the Confederacy. So if the Mohawk Council is saying that we were not part of the Confederacy, the documentation says that the positions that this community took in the 1880s, 1890s against the Indian Act were from the Haudenosaunee. So the thinking the belief was that we were part of the Confederacy. You know? So it was very clear and plain. And then and of course it's just been stronger and stronger. It went into decline for a while, but then it's coming back stronger. We had a great law reading in Oneida last week. All right,
I heard it was fantastic.
It was great. It was there were hundreds of people there. It was the lawn house was full. It was overflowed. There was an overflow tent. And
many community members from here went.
There were about between 30 and 40 people from Gunawaga there, and it was the feedback I'm getting is that people got there. It was who came back, they were inspired by what happened, and it's going to happen again next year, probably in Onondaga next year, and they intend to keep on. So it was a really good uplifting. So the Confederacy is active. We had the Great Law Reading. We had the Turo. We were very active in the United Nations. We're in different areas. And we're still trying to remember that the Confederacy works on both sides of the border. And in the United States, there are overtures now to the State Department. We're talking about passports and ID cards, and there's there are stuff that's going on. So that's why the Confederacy is very careful about who represents the people in certain realms. That we got to be. That's why we have I'll tell you, Kahnawake TV and Mohawk TV sometimes have it's like the difference between the Confederacy, which would be Mohawk TV, and the Iroquois Caucus would be Kahnawake TV. If Kahnawake TV says no, we don't represent Mohawk TV, we're not. However, if Kahnawake TV took all Mohawk TV's material and put them on their website and said, "Oh, we're not representing you, but we're using your stuff, we're using your material, using your story ideas, using everything," that's like the same thing the Iroquois Caucus is doing to them.
Maybe get a letter from us. Tread lightly.
That's right. It's the same thing. It's that same
I get
kind
what you're
of thing.
saying. Yeah, but of course, and when you look at even in that respect to that kind of example, is that it isn't what it is. You know what I mean? Like it's not free, independent press. It's not, whereas Mohawk Television Network definitely is. We're derived out of the people and things like that. So I definitely, in that example, it works wonders. But on the flip side of that, you do have the Mohawk Council saying, well, the community did ask for, a return to a traditional form of governance. What does that mean to everybody? And who are you guys to say, who are you to say, well, we can't use our own symbols, we're Mohawks, we're just not traditional.
Yeah, but in tradition is where the clans come from. It's the traditions that come through. It's the traditions that the Confederacy, the whole idea of bearing our weapons of war, using only good words, putting aside the whole philosophy of putting aside your hate and putting aside your personality stuff when you're dealing with people. The whole issue of relations with sovereigns, what's exempted to the Turo. Those are that comes out of tradition. We're not trying to say that people are not Mohawk. We're just saying is that in a traditional government, we have a constitution. It's already there. We don't have to create a new one.
Right.
Not just Kahnawake. I mean, the band council said, well, we have to create a constitution. Well, we already have one. We don't need to create a new one. And that's what keeps the lineage, the line from prehistory, from before European contact till today. That's the strongest argument in dealing with Canadian and American governments, is that lineage that we have all the way from the past, that through our own philosophy, the Constitution that we have right up to today, is a stronger argument for the Turo and nation-to-nation relationship than councils who get their authority through the Indian Act. The Indian Act, when you look at the Turo, the ship with sails, the Indian Act comes from the ship with sails, and that's where they get their power and authority from, So that you can't argue the Turo if you're part of that, if you get your authority from that ship with sails. We get our authority from the canoe, from our people, from our history. Those are our laws, and that's the stronger argument for the Turo relationship between two sovereigns, not elected councils that get their power and authority through the Indian Act.
Okay. But how did, I know this is maybe a really profound question, but at this point, how does this all get resolved at this point, and I think that's something that what Joss and I had talked about in my last interview with him, with trying to get everybody on, in a good place, because I would imagine that these divisions create just a lot more hardship in the community and politically speaking also.
Right. And I'll tell you one thing, it's not us that are not talking. It's the band council itself has. We met with them, and I said this before. We met with them 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago now, and they said, Mike DeLille said, "I promise you, I will get back to you." And 3 years later, we haven't heard from him. They also had a meeting with Mohawk Trail a couple of months ago or so, or a month ago, and they agreed to a time and a place, and then at the last minute canceled. So the Mohawk Council, it's not, if there's no relationship between the people of the Longhouse and the band council, it isn't our fault. They just don't want one, and they're quite hostile to the Longhouse right now.
I think we make a proposal right here on television to ask the Mohawk Council, why is this happening? Why have they not responded? And I also want to hear the people's thoughts on this. Give us a call on our news line, 450-632-9449. You can call, leave your message. How do we get through this, and what is the benefit of everybody being on the same page at this point?
Well, I think people forget also in the not too distant past when they had the Confederacy had a land rights committee, and they were traveling, and we met with the Quebec government and the Canadian government different times, and it's a Confederacy that went and explained things like the two-row, and I'm talking about the 70s now, and elected councils went with us, we took the lead, and we did all those things in a council, and those kind of things can happen again, and as long as there's an understanding of what is the strongest arguments to bring forward, and I think tradition has the strongest arguments when it comes down to defending our rights, our land rights, or our rights to identity. That's where it comes from.
Okay. Anything else you feel is important to add in all of this?
No, I just want to say that I think there's a lot to be learned in tradition. I think the community still has a lot to learn. I like to say that the Longhouse is not a religion. It's a holistic. It's a way of life.
It's not a religion, and I think,
and that we and I understand that we don't hate Catholics as somebody has told me that they're saying that, and I think that the word hate is a very awful word, a strong word that has.
Yes, that was a statement that was kind of made through the media. I won't mention any particular media, but it was alluded to that through an interview that was done with, I believe it was Joe the Traditionalist, that was an anonymous source, or a source that was unnamed at this point, when talking in reference to traditional people versus
yeah,
the rest of society.
If that's true, that what they said is, it's inciting. It's inciting. Hate just brings up more hate. If you say that somebody hates a particular group of people, you're inciting hatred, and that's not constructive. And that's certainly outside our tradition. And tradition is not to prevent hate, not to promote it. And people who are saying that Longhouse people hate Catholics or hate people with passports or hate something like that is wrong. Is insightful. You're inciting hate, and I can't believe that our media is promoting that kind of stuff, and then promoting something given by an anonymous person. That is, in my tradition, in journalism, you don't do that. You don't allow people to promote hate from a position of anonymity.
No, you don't. And I think we can both agree on that.
That's right.
Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time, and as always, it's very educational, and congratulations too on everything that you're doing on behalf of our community especially. We're very proud of you. I know I am. So thank you to the community for watching. If you have any comments or questions, don't hesitate to email us at mohawktv@hotmail.com, or even for Kenneth, just pop by his house. I'm sending people over there.
Find me on Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook is always a great way to get in touch with us or anybody else. So once again, thanks for staying with us, and we'll see you again soon. Onigi wahi.
Nya Gehaga Tadiadaras de Gayerniga Yadu Zawaderoru.
Yama